Well, hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Scuba Science, where we try to demystify the concepts of scuba diving. In our last episode, we spoke about what scuba diving is. That was step 1. Now we need to go to step 2. What are the dangers of scuba diving? It may seem a little gratuitous to make a video about all the risks and dangers of scuba diving, but as you probably know, I am a very big fan of scuba diving. It is my entire life, and I truly believe that in order to properly train against and prepare for scuba dives, you need to also understand the risks. Only then can we take action and start preventing. This program is self-funded, but if you want to support Scuba Science, you can certainly pick up some Dive Saga merch or my book Career in Scuba, which is for aspiring diving professionals. In fact, a lot of today's knowledge comes directly from the book Career in Scuba. When it comes to the dangers of scuba diving, the most famous one is probably decompression sickness or the bends. Decompression sickness happens when we submerge ourselves in water and breathe compressed gas, because gas dissolves into our tissues at the surrounding pressure, meaning the deeper we go, the more gas dissolves into our tissues. This by itself is not necessarily dangerous, but there is a limit to how much of this gas our body can store safely and let off gas safely on the way up. To manage this, thousands of experiments have been conducted, both theoretical and on real human beings, and we have a pretty good idea of how to prevent the bends. But it is important to know that it can still always happen. Divers should obviously take proper training so that they can follow proper procedures and follow their dive computer so that they can actually plan a dive that is within acceptable limits. Furthermore, just leading a healthy lifestyle in general and making sure you are properly hydrated and exercise regularly goes a long way into being a little bit less likely to get decompression sickness. Barotrauma, or pressure injury, is caused by the difference in pressure between the surrounding pressure and our body air spaces, most notably the lungs and our ears and sinuses. The most common form of barotrauma is ear barotrauma, by failing to equalize on the way down. See, when we scuba dive, as pressure increases around us, we want to even out or equalize the pressure inside our ears. We do this by blowing gently against pinched nostrils or even swallowing. Pulmonary barotrauma, so pressure injury of the lungs, is less common but way more serious and usually happens upon ascent. Failing to breathe continuously and holding your breath while ascending can cause a lung overexpansion injury. This is very serious. It can lead to air embolisms, which are blockages in the brain, and can even lead to paralysis or death. Once again, barotrauma can be prevented by training thoroughly and diving properly. Gas narcosis is a temporary state of altered consciousness. This happens at depth, typically depths greater than 30 meters or 100 feet, though susceptibility is personal. Symptoms of narcosis include impaired judgment, euphoria, a false sense of security, and reduced motor coordination. While narcosis is not directly harmful to you in the moment, that impaired sense of judgment can of course lead to very terrible decision making, a failure to follow dive plans and proper diving techniques, and lead to other injuries. I would say that narcosis is generally wildly exaggerated in movies for dramatic effect, and most people will describe narcosis as a bit of a state of drunkenness. But just like drunk driving is a terrible idea, drunk diving is obviously not a good idea either, because decisions do need to be made and reflexes do need to be there. So in order to prevent other injuries, avoiding narcosis is key. The best way to prevent narcosis is to limit your depth. These are things you learn in training. Once you feel narcosis setting on, you can also make the decision to level up your dive. For technical divers, helium is often used as a breathing gas because it is a non-narcotic gas. Breathing oxygen at high partial pressures can lead to oxygen toxicity. For air, this is typically deeper than 56 meters, 183 feet, but different training agencies do have different approaches to where they put the cutoff. Symptoms of oxygen toxicity range from visual disturbances to a ringing sensation in the ears, nausea or muscle spasms. But ultimately, the biggest symptom is a convulsion. The problem with this is that when a diver convulses underwater, they will most likely spit out their regulator and inhale water, which will lead to drowning. So while a convulsion by itself is not necessarily dangerous, a convulsion underwater is very, very life-threatening. The best way to prevent oxygen toxicity is once again by seeking proper training so that you know how to dive within your limits. There are many courses where these concepts are repeated to make sure that divers know exactly what those limits are. And even when you know what the limits are, it is still up to you to dive even more conservatively. Most bodies of water are almost certainly colder than your core temperature, and diving in very cold water can certainly lead to hypothermia. Hypothermia is also dangerous because it can actually promote decompression sickness because it alters your circulation. The best way to prevent this is, of course, to wear proper exposure protection for the environment you dive in. Your local dive instructor or dive guide can certainly advise you as to which thermal protection is appropriate for your area. But it is also up to you because people do react a little bit differently to temperature. Where one person may be okay with diving in a really thick wetsuit, others may want to dive in a dry suit. Just make sure that if you choose to dive in a dry suit, that you seek proper training before you do that. It is not overly complicated, but it can lead to some dangerous situations if you do not know how to use one. Diving requires physical effort, and depending the environment in which you do dive, that can range from needing to kick a little bit to propel yourself to fighting for dear life against an unexpected current. It is once again very important to learn to dive in the environment in which you plan to dive, because not every diving environment is the same and techniques may vary. One of the leading causes of diver deaths are heart attacks, not necessarily caused by the dive, but certainly triggered by the dive. So making sure that you have a healthy cardiovascular system and a healthy lifestyle does go a long way to preventing overexertion. Dangerous marine life is, in my opinion, probably the most overstated risk. A lot of non-divers or beginning divers think that the ocean is filled with sharks who are looking for a free lunch. In reality, those fears are a little bit exaggerated. But things like stings or bites from certain marine life can either be painful or venomous, so divers do need to once again know the area in which they dive and know which marine life can be harmful to them. At the end of the day, the best way to prevent any of this is to avoid contact with marine life altogether. It is best to dive in an environmentally sensible way that avoids contact with any of the surrounding environment. Strong currents can certainly sweep divers into unplanned areas where they may not be able to handle the diving situations. This is again something that you should be trained for if you are planning to dive in an area that does have strong currents. You can also plan for this by carrying a delayed surface marker buoy or some kind of signaling device that allows your surface support to be aware of your whereabouts. Poor visibility can also take divers off guard. Depending on where you learned how to dive, you may not necessarily be comfortable with diving in low visibility environments. For instance, if you learn to dive in the Caribbean where visibility is often amazing and then go home where visibility in the quarry is maybe a little bit less, that may actually come as a bit of a surprise to you. So once again, training and additional training in your local environment is always a good thing. Overhead environments like caves or big wrecks are certainly a potential killer. It is very, very important, once again, that if you want to pursue wreck diving and certainly cave diving, that you take proper training. Overhead diving is actually an advanced type of diving because there is no more direct access to the surface. So even if any of the previously discussed dangers do present themselves, you do not have direct access to the surface, and any problem needs to be dealt with in the overhead environment while you work your way out. This is extremely advanced. I am aware that here on the 𝐬𝐲𝐫𝐞 channel there is a lot of rec and definitely cave diving content, but at the start of almost every episode is a disclaimer stating specifically that you need to seek specific training for this type of activity. Weather conditions can be unpredictable and can change quickly depending on the environment in which you dive, ranging from wind and waves to currents or tides. It is very important to become diligent at checking the forecast and including that into your dive plan. It is generally speaking fairly easy to avoid getting caught in unexpected bad weather as long as the planning for the dive in that environment is diligent. In my personal experience, the majority of diving accidents have something to do with a lack of training, an inappropriate response, or attempting to do something that the diver is not qualified to do. It can be tempting to look at a lot of training agencies' course outlines and suspect some kind of capitalist motive for offering so many different courses for so many different environments. But the truth is that different environments conceal different risks, and you do not know what you don't know. In other words, a lot of the risks are hidden and not immediately obvious until a problem presents itself. This is once again specifically true for diving in overhead environments or decompression diving, but also very specific natural environments can require specific training. So never engage in types of diving that you have not been trained to dive in. Equipment failure is, just like sharks, one of those common fears that people have that are actually a bit more rare than they really are. In the case of equipment, it is just important to use proper scuba diving equipment and get that equipment serviced regularly. Take good care of your dive gear, rinse it thoroughly and store it appropriately. Before you start the dive, make sure you and your dive buddies do proper safety checks with each other to make sure that you can catch anything that is either broken, malfunctioning or not connected. It can, of course, be advisable, depending on your environment, to dive with a redundant piece of diving equipment. A spare mask is very common to have in a pocket, but even completely separate air sources on your person are not uncommon. In my opinion, especially in recreational diving, the plug and play mentality is a contributor to unexpected problems. Once you are comfortable with scuba diving, it is very tempting to simply jump into your equipment, jump in the water and jump into the dive without really having a plan that's been thoroughly communicated with your teammates. Sitting down for a few minutes, discussing the plan, the depths, the times and the navigational particularities of that dive go a long way into avoiding miscommunications on the dive and preventing accidents. Ultimately, a lot of accidents aren't life-threatening, but get tipped over the edge by panic or anxiety. Not knowing how to respond calmly in a specific emergency can be deadlier than the emergency itself. Here as well, of course, training exists, but even the best rescue diver training is no substitute for experience. You need to know the right rescue techniques, but you also need to be comfortable in your diving experience to be able to apply these techniques calmly. Therefore, I am a big advocate of always seeking out experts, whether they are experts for the local environment or for the new activity that you're trying to engage in. Diving with somebody more knowledgeable than yourself can only help you grow as a diver. But no matter what happens, as long as you have gas, you have time. And as long as you have time, you can remain calm and work towards a solution. In my opinion, respecting your limits, but also practicing calm breathing techniques goes a long way in avoiding panic and anxiety on a dive. There is something called the Dunning-Kruger Effect, which means that when we first start an activity, we don't know anything and we realize that. But as we start learning about that activity, we very quickly overestimate how much we know about it. And it is not until the much later stages that we start realizing we don't know anything at all. So the best approach to scuba diving and scuba diver training is to assume that you do not know everything and that there are hidden dangers that you are not aware of. You don't know what you don't know. In conclusion, there are some risks to scuba diving, and it would be grotesque to say that there aren't. But understanding these dangers on an intimate level and training to prevent them and having the proper equipment and the proper team to make sure you can deal with situations when they present themselves is key. This video is in no way meant as instruction for you to learn how to dive. You always need instruction from an instructor in person in the water. But maybe this goes a long way into knowing what you can expect and what you can do to avoid it. That's the whole point of scuba science.